an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Rogue, chapters 24, 25, and 26. A meeting, giving and withholding, and rings and stones. In these chapters, everybody finally gets wise to what the fuck is going on with Naki, and I could not be more relieved. Also, it turns out that I was wrong about Lorkin's role in that, and Dannyl is the one who informed them. This is all very interesting. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. I am so glad that we are dealing with this Naki thing at this moment. Like, this gives us another 27 through 30, which is just over 50 pages for the next episode, although I think that should be fine. So I think that the next episode, I'll be finishing up this book. Y'all, I just didn't expect, I thought that the thing with Naki had gone on so long that we weren't going to get the resolution with that until the very end of the book at this point. And I'm glad that it's taken care of, both because I was really just getting irritated with everybody, but also because I think that means that Naki is going to turn out to be a factor in a larger plot point that's going on. So that means that things will tie in a little bit more than it seemed like they would from where I was sitting. And I'm very glad to see that. So this couple of chapters, chapter 24 starts off with a meeting, and Dannyl is riding this like little pony up to basically the top of a mesa where a bunch of native Duna are living and protecting secrets. This is a really interesting segment to me. And it brought to mind some of the stuff that I was like the most interested in the first trilogy of books regarding exploring new places and finding out information while in those places and learning about them. I think something that has become increasingly clear about Kyralia is how sort of insular it is. They don't really seem to be like absorbing information. Isn't like a expansive enough a word. They just, the magicians specifically are really who I'm talking about. They really seem to not explore as much as Dannyl. Like, Dannyl seems to be an outlier in terms of how much he wants to go and discover new things and how much he even like trusts that new things exist. If that makes sense. Like, it's one thing to be willing to believe a new thing when somebody tells you that it's out there. It's another thing to be someone who is open-minded enough to believe that whether you know about them, like whether somebody's telling you about them or not, there are probably new things out there that you can trust in general in other human beings' capacity for imagination, that they may have done things outside of the little sphere of what you personally have been exposed to. A lot of study has proven that people who tend to be more open to these sorts of things are people who are really high in empathy. Because empathy sort of fosters this concept of a world outside yourself that isn't limited to what you and only you have experienced. And I feel like that applies to Dannyl pretty well. Also, I really like how it's emphasized in a lot of ways that this community is doing fine living in a place that a lot of people would not feel was adequate based on the standards of living that we are used to, living in homes the way that we do, that are like built structures. There's a real tendency to use language, even as an author who isn't intending it to be this way. But, excuse me. I'm sorry, guys. I'm so congested today. There's a tendency to use language that is very subtly like negative about a more primitive way of living. And primitive is one of those words that we have a negative association with, but that's not what the word means. It doesn't necessarily mean worse. We just hear the word primitive and we think worse because we have our baggage that we bring to the table with that. But I really like that these people are, you know, being treated with respect. Their customs are being honored. And like a chatty shows up with gifts and they are actually surprised at the fact that gifts are like, that they have not only decided to educate themselves on what the traditions are for this tribe of people, but they are following those traditions, which, you know, that's a whole other layer of effort there. It's one thing to absorb something in a scholastic sense, you know, an intellectual sense, but it's another to actually use that as, you would think that people who look up this sort of information and educate themselves about it, that those people would be doing so with plans to put that into practical use. But you would be shocked at how infrequently that is the case. It's really, to me, it's like, what's the point if that's not what you're going to do with it? But people just want to know for the sake of knowing without using that to inform their actual behavior or the way they interact with the world. So, and I have to say too, that there's a description here of how completely precarious this climb is. Carriages were too wide for the narrow road, which twisted and turned on itself at angles impossible for a vehicle to manage. The high side of the slope was so close that Dannyl had occasionally scraped his boots on the rock wall. His other boot hovered over a near vertical cliff plunging down to either a stretch of the road below or to the distant valley floor. Though he had no fear of heights, he'd found that the constant threat of such a precipice put him on edge. A chatty appeared to grit his teeth and resolutely set his gaze on the road ahead. Tyend, despite not having the reassurance of magic to call upon should he or his horse slip, didn't appear to be bothered at all. Why? I'm just realizing, actually, that's getting my attention in a way that it didn't the first time. Despite not having the reassurance of magic to call upon. Oh, right, because my Tyend's not a magician. Boop, boop, boop. I always forget that. I really do. So, guys, I hate heights so much. I don't know if I've mentioned that on this show. I have a profound fear of heights. It causes in me the kind of locked up brain dead behavior that you see in movies and stuff where somebody absolutely shuts down. That is how I get with heights. And I did this sort of like group trust building exercise at this place. For some reason, zip lines and stuff didn't really bother me. I think because that full body harness gave this illusion of safety. But I was doing a ropes course afterwards where we had to leap from the end of this 2x4. The 2x4 stood out from the trunk of this tree about 6 feet, and you had to walk to the end of the 2x4 and leap from the end of it to grab a trapeze that was hanging just outside of anyone's reach. Like, you could imagine walking up to it and being able to just touch it, but it was not quite close enough to do that. And I will never forget, it took everything in me just to climb the tree. And I had a safety net underneath me. And I believe I had something around my waist to catch me in case. Then it was not like the kind of harness as for a zip line, but it was something to prevent me just plummeting. So it wasn't like I was just out there free and open. I had safety structures in place. Nevertheless, I had a crowd of people below me cheering me on, trying to get me to the end of that 2x4 and to jump and grab that trapeze. And I got to the end of the 2x4. I could not do it, guys. I couldn't jump. And it was like my whole self was telling me to just jump. Like, mentally, I wanted to jump. But my body was responding in a way that completely cut me off from giving my body orders. It was just what I claimed I wanted was evidently not enough to override what my body wanted, which was to not be there anymore. And I wound up just like jumping off from the end of the, and this is the part that makes no sense. So people who don't have a fear of heights won't get this. It was easier for me to simply drop off the edge of the end of the 2x4, like jump off, than it was to try and leap for that trapeze and maybe not catch it. In the first one, I'm purposefully trying to fall because falling will bring me to the safety net, will bring me to safety. I am controlling that. But to take a leap and hope that I grab a thing and then maybe not, and then wind up falling when I did not intend to do that, that was a whole other situation. And I just was like, I couldn't do it. So just reading this, and then they have to leave again. And I just, guys, this really like got to me. It gave me a little bit of anxiety. And Dannyl is like, takes advantage a little bit of the fact that everybody is so distracted that they won't notice him using this ring to communicate. And that is how he lets Austin know about and I love how that interaction goes, because Dannyl, like, this happens later, obviously, but Dannyl tells, is it Osen or Austin? I'm going to call him Osen. Dannyl tells Osen, expecting that Osen is going to be super intrigued by the idea of setting up an alliance with the Duna. And as we know, also will be happening with the traders. And instead, Osen is really interested in these stones and these rings. And because Dannyl doesn't know what's in the middle of what Osen's in the middle of right now and what he's dealing with, he does not understand why that's what Osen is paying attention to. He's like, but dude, I'm talking about like setting up an alliance here. Why are you not paying attention to that? And I was like, yeah, it makes sense that he doesn't understand his focus on that. So he's like, yeah, but sir, and Osen basically is like, gotta go. And I kind of understood why he was sort of like, fuck, man, come on. So he, I'm going to bounce back to the beginning here, but I just wanted to talk about that because it just really got to me, and it made me think of how he takes advantage of everybody being so worried about this, except for Tyan, I guess. But Tyan seems to take it for granted that Dannyl is concerned enough that he doesn't attempt to initiate conversation with Dannyl. So they come up on this mesa, and it's kind of cool how this is described. Let's see, I'm trying to find a spot where they come up to this turn and there's a guide there. And Dannyl is really thrilled by this whole thing. And he says something like, exciting, huh? And Dannyl thinks to himself how this is the tie-in that he remembers, and he feels this sort of pang over it. And I was just like, man, come on. Like, can't you two work it out? It just sort of made me feel like there's still something there, man. You guys like lost touch with one another. But it feels like this might be the thing to sort of rekindle all of that, you know? This trip, and I think maybe that's what Tyend is doing. I think, I wasn't really sure if Tyend, when he kind of confessed to Dannyl, so I take it this means that we're not a thing anymore. I was initially, as you all know, really saddened by Tyend's behavior until he described Dannyl's behavior, and then I began to sort of see how he was feeling and understood a little bit better why he'd make the choices that he made. And so I began to sort of be like Team Dannyl a little bit. And I'm thinking now that, or Team Tyend, sorry, not Team Dannyl. And I had been thinking that Tyend was just trying to cock block Dannyl out of like, just maybe a bit of like jealousy and also amusement. But I'm beginning to realize I think Tyend believes that this adventure may save their relationship a little bit. And he is trying to keep Dannyl from making a major mistake. Or mistake may be too judgmental a word, but he's trying to keep Dannyl from doing anything major, like sleeping with somebody new after all this time, before this trip has had its chance to work its magic on the two of them. I think he's hoping, if he continues connecting with Dannyl about what they're learning and discovering, and reminds him of the things that brought them together, that eventually Dannyl will be grateful that will be relieved that he didn't sleep with a Chadi, is sort of where I think Tyend's head is at. And you know what? That makes sense to me. I actually could see that. So I am super curious, what's going to continue to happen here, but it feels like that was just, I don't know. And I think Tyend has a bit more understanding of the situation than I gave him credit for initially, and that Dannyl gives him credit for even now. After a full day of riding, the change of surroundings was so abrupt, it left Dannyl feeling disoriented. Suddenly, the horizon had returned. The land was so flat that there was nothing between Dannyl and the line where the gray earth met the sky. Nothing except a whole lot of tents, he corrected himself, as his horse turned to follow Achades. Even then, the gathering of temporary homes blended with the color of the land. It looked like a tangle of cloth and poles. And we find out that it is super hot here. And yet it's the middle of winter. Later on, he's like walking to see somebody and it's a little bit of a way and he just begins to pour sweat. And Dannyl says, we must be about as far north as Lonmar. The differences between seasons there isn't as great as it is in the south, which then made me have to sort of reevaluate the way I've seen this like universe. I was unconsciously putting Kyralia in like a European, like putting it in that area of our map, and putting Duna somewhere in probably North Africa, like Egypt or some, and I just realized like, well, there's no reason to think that. I'm sure that there's a map and I haven't looked at it, but it seems as if Kyralia is more like, it's south of the equator actually. So going north brings you to a warmer area and to an area where the seasons don't change as much. That, for some reason, really like broke my brain a little bit. So they get brought from place to place, and the guide presents the same question to everyone. These people have come to speak to the tribes, he said, his voice lower and respectful. Who has the voice? Two of the men pointed toward a gap in the tents. The guide thanked them, then directed his mount into the opening. Every 10 or so tents, the guide repeated the question, and each time set off in the direction the Duna pointed in. I think this is so cool. Basically, these are people who were like, as democratic as it's possible to get. So rather than having elected representatives that make decisions, they pass along the choices and decision responsibilities amongst one another cyclically, which is really smart. I love this idea. Now, one could argue you have the danger of really people who are bad people or who have bad judgment getting the choice and speaking for your crew. But once we actually find out who has the voice, it turns out there are several people. And this means that whether or not somebody is stupid or has bad judgment, they will hopefully be outweighed by the other people in the group. I'm trying to find if it says exactly how many of them there are. A small crowd of children began following them. Outside a tent no more extraordinary than the rest sat a ring of old men cross-legged on a blanket on the ground. We are the voice today, one of the old men answered. Who asks the questions? So, yeah, I don't think it specifically says how many people. And I do wonder about the fact that they're all men. I don't know if that's by design or if that just happens to be a coincidence of the way the names were drawn today. And I'm saying I am assuming that's the way it goes here in terms of them handing it round and round because of the fact that the guide has to inquire of everyone and they have to give him directions. So they bring their gifts out and this dude is gratified that they've done this. And inside it says knives, a box containing a glass lens, a roll of good quality paper, and a writing set with pen and ink. The old men hummed with pleasure. From the way they handled the items, it was clear they were familiar with their uses, despite the fact that they would not be easily obtainable in Duna. And the speaker says, ask your questions. Know that we may not answer at once. We may not answer at all. So Dannyl explains to them that he's been doing research and has come across a lot of stuff that's causing questions and asks about the Store Stone. And he says, what was it? Do any more exist?
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, Siri. She hasn't done that in a minute, though. She's been quiet. Good for her. Does the knowledge of how to make one still exist? If it does, how could any land defend itself against its use? And they laugh at how many questions he has, and he offers to stop asking, and they're like, no, you can ask as many as you want. And he says, I want to ask about what these magical gemstones can do. You don't need to tell me how to make them. I won't ask that. But what are their limitations? How can we defend ourselves against something like this? And Achadi, at this point, they ask him, and do you also want the answers to these questions? And Achadi says, of course, but if you wish to speak to Dannyl alone, then I will leave. And a part of me respected this because it seems like he's trying to honor the fact that they may not wish to share their secrets with anybody. But there was another part of me, I have to admit, that got a little bit suspicious over it. And I don't really, I don't know exactly what it was that I was even suspicious of. I think that I was sort of wondering, is it possible that he has done something to sort of bug Dannyl, and thus, no matter if he's there or not, he will still get to hear whatever Dannyl is told. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being too paranoid. I just don't really trust Achadi, is kind of what it comes down to. I don't want to be this way because it feels racist. But in general, a lot of the Sachakans have not been above the board players, especially those who are of nobility. Like the traders, who one could argue about whether they're Sikschakan or not, but they, you know, they are obviously sort of exempt from this overall assessment. But we have seen precious few Sichakans who seem to have any misgivings at all about slavery. And I just can't really trust a person who comes from a society that employs slavery and they don't seem to have any sort of issue with it. To me, something that fundamental about whether or not you are a good person, it's just, that is not something that I can compromise on. You believe in slaves? I don't think you're a good person. I just, you know, and I don't know what to think about him trying to hook up with Dannyl. Like, part of me sort of wondered, especially when we read in this section, there's a moment a little bit later with Lorkin and Tyvara, who finally hook up BG Dubs. And she says something about, you know, the whole thing is, oh, I'm going to teach you how to take magic during sex. And I was suddenly like, you know, it didn't really occur to me. I'm sure a Chadi could take magic during sex. Like, he could potentially be trying to lure Dannyl into doing something. And I don't know if it's like just that he wants to hook up with him, or if is he going to try and kill him? Could he kill him and make it seem like an accident that way? There's a lot about a Chadi's motivations that I don't really know. It's sort of presented that he just wants to know a lot of the same things that Dannyl wants to know out of pure curiosity because he has the same questions. Maybe that is why. I don't know. You know? So, anyway, so eventually I will get there once that section comes back again. But eventually Dannyl is taken to some people who are going to give him answers. They said some of the questions can only be answered by a keeper of the lore who may not agree to speak to you. There is a tent here for guests that you are welcome to sleep in while you wait. And then we go over to Sania. Sania is like revving herself up because she is going to go and see Dorian, or not even see him. She's going to go to the hospital, but she's going to try and not do what she did last time, which is ensure that she shows up late enough that he won't run into her. She's been avoiding him. So she finally sort of hypes herself up mentally and decides to head over and just fucking face things. The main issue for her is that she hasn't decided what she's even going to say to him. And there's this moment here. The other ingredient she considered essential was respect, and that troubled her the most. Dorian is married. If he was unfaithful to Alina with me, I would lose respect for myself and for him. And this is a really interesting thing that I often wonder about. A lot of you know how my relationship with Owen started, that I was already married and he and I were talking and began to get pretty seriously into each other while I was still married. And within that time, me and my then husband had already agreed to divorce, but I was still living there and I was still like, I had not had success in finding a new job and starting a savings to get out of there. So as much as we had agreed to split, it wasn't official, and technically things started before that agreement anyway. And I have often wondered and asked Owen, do you ever worry that I'm going to do to you what I did to Brendan? Because I just don't think that if I were in his shoes, I would be altogether comfortable. It's a difficult thing to watch somebody, even as much as you love and trust them, do something inherently untrustworthy and then continue to trust them. I understand Sania's point of view here as much as I don't want to understand it, because it's sort of like an indictment of myself. I have to admit I was capable of doing something that shady, and that is something that Owen knows. You know, like there's just no getting around it. And so for me, I really don't think that I could have a relationship with somebody who was cheating on whomever they were with to be with me. I just don't believe that I would have it in me to have faith they would come through and leave that person for me. Although in some ways, and I've talked about this with Owen, he says that's part of what he thinks drew me to him, or drew him to me in the first place, was the fact that I was spoken for, and that he has a complex about being certain that people will abandon him. And so he found somebody that would abandon him. He was certain, like he really thought, she's not leaving her husband. I don't know why I'm doing this, like that kind of thing. And then I wound up actually like leaving, and he was so shocked. And it was like one of those like, oh my God, I said I wanted this to happen, and I wasn't lying when I said that, but now it's happening. And I genuinely am so unprepared that now I don't know what to do. So anyway, I thought that was a nice thing for the author to at least bring up, because that is the thing, is you can really like somebody, but respect is a massive factor. And I think a lot of us, when they talk about how familiarity breeds contempt, the more you get to know someone, the more you begin to see their flaws. And it's really contingent on what kind of respect you have for the person to begin with, how much those sorts of flaws affect your overall respect. You know, there are certain things that, should I find this and that out, I'll be like, oh, well, you're a human. Oh, well, what can you do? And there are other kinds of flaws that I begin to be like, okay, I don't think I can deal with that. I'm sorry. I see you as less than I did before. So she says to herself how she wishes she could talk to Rothan, but she knows that he would disapprove, which, yeah, this is the kid's fucking dad. Don't do it. Don't do it. And then she says to herself, like, well, I wish that he would just go back to the country or send his wife back, and immediately interrupts herself by being like, but I still need him really badly to find Skellen. And then she's like, do I? I mean, Ceri's doing most of the work. And then she's like, but he's probably going to have magic, so I will need a like back and forth. That kind of thing that you do when you've begun to be interested in somebody that you know it's not a hugely great idea for you to be interested in. And so you begin to argue with yourself, and both sides of the argument make valid points. I have been here so many times. So she starts to head in, and a healer interrupts her with a note. And so there had been about to be a conversation between her and Dorian, and she winds up having to sort of take it all back and be like, Dorian, we gotta go. There's shit happening. So they are brought through, or I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, because they wind up showing up exactly when shit really begins to go down with Lillia. And this is one of those moments where I feel bad, because Lillia has been such a sweet little cinnamon roll, and I have been totally able to tolerate that from her versus everyone else. And now I'm having to watch her realize that she has been duped, and it's really tough. So Lillia helps Ceri and Anya and Gaul up into the rafters of this building where they're going to be spying. And they all are hiding up there until eventually she looks out and sees Naki. And let's see. Here it is. The other couple consisted of a rather fat, well-dressed man and a slim woman who, if anything, was more beautiful in the moonlight than daylight. Lilia's heart felt as if it had begun to glow inside her. Naki, I found her at last. She could not tell if the other two groups of men belonged with Naki's thief or Enka. It doesn't matter, she thought. They're not magicians. They can't stop me. So Anyi is like, go ahead. And, Sari says, don't forget to protect Enka and his second. So Lillia goes down, floats to the ground, and she has her shield up just in case any of the other people with Naki try and come at her. And her shield bumps up against Naki's, indicating that Naki indeed has magic again. And as she realizes that, I think that's the beginning of her being like, what the fuck? Because I think she was telling herself that if Naki had gotten involved with some bad people, it was probably because she was vulnerable without her magic. And so this is the first little twinge for Lillia. Naki having her magic back is weird. And also, something about the shield nagged at her, however. Yeah, we find out that shield is really strong. Stronger than it should be if one person is doing it. And this is the second little twinge for her of being like, something isn't right. This girl not only has her magic back, she's fucking, like, overpowered. Which signals that she somehow took more magic, which signals that she probably does black magic. And this is all, Lillia doesn't think these thoughts in a linear way, but it's like something in her gut immediately puts together the cause and effect here, and it's before her brain can quite process it, and she just knows something isn't right. And when she says, Naki, it's so good to see you. What trouble have you got yourself into this time? She kind of expects that maybe Naki is going to say her name with hatred or accusation, as it says. And I was like, why would she? And then I was like, oh, right. Because Lillia still thinks that Naki thinks she killed her dad. And I was just like, oh God, sweetie, you are so far behind. I just couldn't, with this. So Naki says, as you can tell, I don't need your help. And Lillia's like, yeah, I can tell. Oh my God, she doesn't want to be rescued. This is what she wants. So she tries to speak with her mind to Naki and says, are you being blackmailed? Which I'll give credit to Lillia here. The thought to try and do that was just a really smart, as softly as possible in the hope that nobody in the guild would hear. It's not super smart if she's genuinely concerned about being overheard in a real way, because I feel like that would be, if anything, if they were able to hear Naki say, yes, I'm being blackmailed, that might work in their favor if they get discovered. But just the idea that maybe Naki's being blackmailed into this, as much as I was so frustrated with her for not figuring this out sooner, I did appreciate that thought occurring to her and trying to get the info this way. So this is when Naki says, no, you slow-witted fool. This is what I planned all along. Get away from the guild and all their rules and suffocating judgment and be free to do whatever I want. Her stare was full of hatred now. Lillia felt a familiar wave of guilt, but she resisted the urge to look away. I did not kill her father, she told herself. She has no reason to hate me. But uncertainty remained. Naki clearly did not want to be rescued. What do I do now? So she's standing there weighing the pros and cons. And finally, she says something like, are you sure this is what you want to do? Because these people, they're not really your friends. You're going to be still indebted to them. And she says they'll force you to tell them what was in the book, then they'll kill you. And Naki gets confused. And then all of a sudden she realizes what it is that Lillia is saying and how Lillia is just so deeply misinterpreting the circumstances of literally every aspect of this. And something began to bang against the shield Lillia was holding around Ceri's allies. She glanced to the side to see that Ceri's thief friend and his companion were trying to get out of the barrier. Then she noticed that the fat thief and his men were moving away toward the fishing boat. Hoping that there was nobody left to harm Ceri's allies, she let the shield around them fall. So yeah, they're just like desperately like, okay, you know what? I don't want any fucking part of this. I'm out, son. And again, not like Lillia has still not caught on to shit. So Naki, she says, let's see. Oh, you think I would really tell them that? If the price was right, working with the rogue magicians might be tempting. It wouldn't be smart, would it? I'd be creating potential enemies as powerful as me. And Lilia's like, oh my God, you did learn black magic that night. And Naki's like, no, not that night. I had learned black magic before I even met you. You know, that should have occurred to me. I should really have realized that that was more likely, that there's no way that she could have learned it that night and still have had this whole plan worked out to get Lillia involved. Like, she would have had to know already that she could pull off something like this in order to figure the plan out. And I know that I said this once already, but I am extremely curious about the servant that she got involved with, who got like sent away. I'm wondering if that was even like, did that servant get sent away, or did they just say she did because Naki killed her somehow? You know, I had been thinking before that Naki was maybe just like kind of a messy, problematic person. But I believe that she was sincerely gay and sincerely maybe like, you know, being sort of mistreated by her father because of it. And now that I know more, I have no faith that whatever was going on with her and that maid was of a romantic nature. It may have just been a power thing, you know? So Naki at this point, when she says, no, I taught it to you before we even met, she lashes out at Lillia with magic. And it sends Lillia staggering back. Her shield is still up, but she is really taken off guard, both by the fact that Naki took a shot at her at all, but also at the fact that Naki's shot is not, this is not like an injury shot. This is her trying to hurt Lillia, and it becomes very clear. She's trying to kill her and not holding back at all. Let's see. The best chance she had was to fight back carefully. She'd never know the truth if Naki died, so she threw magic back at Naki. At first the strikes were meager things compared to Naki's, and the other girl laughed, but Lillia found she rapidly grew used to using this much power. Naki's strikes were careless, which sent a trickle of fear through Lillia. If she's known black magic for so long, has she been strengthening herself? I haven't used black magic once. I'm only as strong as I naturally am, and I've been levitating a lot. So she is about to try and fire another bolt and realizes that she has no strength left, and her shield begins to go down. And at this point, Naki's about to like just celebrate the fact that she's winning. But then Naki stops and says, you haven't been taking magic, have you? You had this opportunity at your fingertips this whole time. And you've been out there, not even part of the guild. And you still haven't done it, you idiot. And she pulls out a knife and is about to cut Lillia's throat. And then somebody yanks her backward. And it turns out that we've got the magicians coming from one side, who I am guessing yanked her away, and Anya, Gol, and Ceri coming from the other side. And this moment, I just love this so much. Following her gaze, Lillia saw that Sari, Anya, and Gaul were standing right behind her, along with 2 other magicians in green robes whom she had never seen before. Anything broken? Anya murmured. Just my pride. And your heart, I think. Lillia stared at Anya, who gave her a knowing look before stepping away. And I like this and this next part. Lillia says, Anya says, drop around anytime, you'll be welcome. Lillia says, I don't think they're going to let me have a free rein to go visiting. And Anya says, well, then we'll just have to drop in on you. And I love this. I love the fact that Anya basically is like, girl, I know you were in love with her and it's fine. You should definitely like not feel bad about that. And also, I'm a thief, and whether or not they let you out has nothing to do with whether we get to see each other. That's just we'll let them think that that's a factor. I promise we'll figure it out. So they're leaving, and Ani paused to look back, grinning. When Lillia says, how'd you get down from the beam? She says, with not as much difficulty and swearing as the others. And I was like, I would have loved to see that. I really would. So I like that the author found a pretty plausible way to get them hampered so that they can't come and help Lillia immediately. And she can really know for certain that Naki was going to kill her. Absolutely. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Because I think Lillia is just that dense that I don't know if she would have believed it if it hadn't come down to she has a knife pressed to my throat and is digging in with it, So then we go to Lorkin's POV, and he's traveling with Tyvara. And it wasn't until this point when they're walking and they're talking about the fact that, every night they sleep because they are so tired from their traveling, they just pass out. And all of a sudden I was like, oh shit, these 2 are alone together. They could potentially hook up now. And it hadn't even entered my mind when I heard that they were going to be going off together. I guess because I wasn't entirely sure how long they were going to be together for. But sure enough, I love this conversation. This is pretty funny. A snowstorm blows up and they have to find this cave to hunker down in for the afternoon. And because they are stopping earlier than usual, they aren't as tired as they normally are. So they have some time to talk to one another. And this moment, he asks her if she, when she's going to be turning around, and she sort of points to this area that they can see from there. And she's like, up until then, and then I'm going to head my way. And he's looking at Tyvara and thinking how much he wants to say all these different things, but realizing it's probably better to just let her come out of her shell rather than trying to draw her out. And also it says he remembered Chari's appraisal of Tyvara. She did not want to be encumbered. To seek a bond with her would only drive her away. I really like the fact that he's like, the moment that I start to say anything, she's just going to pull away from that. Because I feel like that's probably true. He has to let her do the thing. And she kind of does. She says, I am. And then stops and he says, yes. Not seeking a bond is one thing, but I'm not going to let her get away with mysterious unfinished sentences. Tyvara shook her head. I knew this would happen. I didn't want to become attached to you because I knew if I did, something would take you away. Suddenly, he couldn't stop smiling. She looked up and frowned. What's so funny? I love you too, he said. She stared at him, then a smile slowly spread across her face. I'm not very good at this, am I? He shook his head. Appalling. Well, there it is. What a pair we are. Except we're not a pair, since you're heading home and I am too. And he says, if it makes you feel any better, I'll promise to come back. And she's like, no promises. And he's like, well, maybe you don't want to promise, but I'd kind of like a promise that you're not going to go fucking somebody else. Just saying. And when she's like, we don't try and be like men. We're not out here doing that sort of shit. He's like, that wasn't a promise. And she's like, that's as best you're going to get. So shut up. So she says, you should take power from me before you go. And this to me just was good sense. You know, she's like, you're about to go out there and be alone at the mercy of anybody believing your story or not believing your story, or believing your story and deciding it would be best for them to do what the fuck they feel like with you. You definitely should top yourself up and more so that you can defend yourself. And Lorkin's a little bit like, oh God, I didn't think of it that way, but that's kind of scary. Yeah, I guess you have a point. And he's like, I'm surprised that they're going to let me take power from you. Like, I thought that because of the, social structure, I wouldn't be allowed. And she's like, oh, the queen was the one who suggested it. She also suggested I teach you lover's death. And he starts to be like, oh my God, she's basically telling me that she wants to sleep with me. Oh my God. And then he's like, be cool, be cool, be cool. Oh my God, oh my God. And she said, it's useful for killing people or draining them to the point of exhaustion, but that's not all. For most couples or lovers, it's a much more enjoyable way to give or receive power. Do you want me to teach you? It takes a certain self-control for a man to bring a woman to the point where he can take power from her. You think you can manage that? He smiled and nodded again. Well then, let the lesson begin. For the next who cares how long, more than an exotic kind of magic was learned. And it says at the end, like after she gets herself calmed down, it says, do you trust me? She asked when she had regained her composure. He nodded rapidly. She laughed, then taught him why giving was even better than taking. So that's a pretty good bit. I like that. So speaking of sex, then we go back to Tyvara and Dannyl. And Dannyl heads off to this meeting with the keepers of the lore. And they only let him go. Tyvara can't come and Ashleigh can't come. And Ashleigh seems very unsurprised by this. Tyvara seems to be sort of uninterested, to be honest, which is part of why I think that this is really about trying to mend things between them. And this is when he gets information about the stones and tells him two kinds of stones can be made. One can be taught a task, but the magic must come from the holder. One can be taught a task and holds magic for the task. Both can be made to use once or many times, but the stone must again be filled when it's emptied. And when he talks about the store stone, she says, really, that's an anomaly. Most stones can't take that kind of power and not break under the pressure of all of the magic. They just hold as much as they need to function however they need to function. And the kind that probably created that wasteland, it had no stop to it, which is just super rare. And we don't know how to tell if they're going to be that kind of strength. So very few get made because nobody wants to risk overloading a stone and breaking it or causing an explosion or whatever. So at this point, she says something about even if a magician takes and holds too much power, it's dangerous. And Dannyl's like, are you saying that a black magician can take so much power that it kind of overwhelms them? And she says yes. And to me, this felt like a pretty obvious foreshadowing that Naki is going to take too much power, that she's going to overload herself, and that's going to be the way that they take her down because she can't control it. And I am going to be interested to see that, because I would have thought that would be something we'd have already seen happen with some of the other rebel Sachakans, like that one of them would have overloaded themselves, or that the knowledge that you could would have been mentioned already. I don't remember that ever being mentioned, and this feels like pretty far along in the series for that to suddenly be a new rule that's introduced. I'm kind of calling a little bullshit on that, but you know, I'm prepared to eat crow if it turns out that this has been mentioned and I just missed it. So she, you know, they talk a little bit more about the ways in which this magic works. And he asks, can a stone be enchanted to basically take magic from people? And she's like, they can be made to take magic, but they can't like work unless that person was cut or forced to swallow the stone. It's not something that you could just touch somebody with a rock and all of a sudden their power has been taken away. So yeah, that's kind of freaky as well, but nevertheless, that's a nice, like, I'm glad that there still has to be a break in the skin for that to work. I guess it'd be a pretty good way to back up power. Like if I was going to be an evil magician and I knew that I was just going to like be walking through the Kyralian countryside, slaughtering villages of people, maybe I would get a stone like that and, you know, basically make it into the tip of a weapon that I could stab people with. So the skin's broken, suck the power out of them into the stone. And then I could suck power into myself and I'd have this stone with like all this backup power as basically like a backup battery. But you know, that's just if I was like a really bad guy, whatever. So, this is when he asks, how much do the traders know of making stones? Her eyebrows lowered. All that we know and more. They once traded with us, but broke our trust by taking the secrets from us. Which I want to know more details about that, because that just is really shitty. And I'm judging the traders super hard for that. I just feel like the Duna just seem to be like victims of everybody's shittiness. So this is when they say that they are interested in entering into some sort of like trade agreement protection situation. And they also tell him that they are going to leave it up to him who he tells the information about the stones and how they can protect against like mind reading and stuff. They're going to leave it up to him who he tells. And he realizes that telling a Chadi would cause probably a mass slaughter of slaves, because they're going to be searching for people who have this stone somewhere in their body and will be questioning people, and it's just going to be really ugly, and a lot of traders are going to get killed. So he's just like, yeah, no, I'm not telling a Chadi about that. I'm keep that shit to myself. So we jump from there to the pre-trial situation. These two girls have both been mind read again. And at this point, I had just, I don't know, assumed that there was going to be some sort of like break in this. And I don't know what I thought was going to happen, but they have tried, and Naki's story is just, she learned black magic before Lord Leden's death by experimenting, but she didn't realize she had succeeded. Otherwise, she would not have encouraged Lillia to try it. A thief heard about her and blackmailed her into working for him. He also ordered her to kill Lillia. And I'm listening to all of this and I was like, what? And then I remembered that, oh, you can be like tricked into seeing thoughts that somebody would expect. So it's like a combination of hiding what actually happened and also creating a narrative that they can like trace instead. So then we go into chapter 26. And there's a whole thing with Lorkin and Tyvara that's honestly like not super exciting. It's just a lot of him like pining after her and him trying to tell her to stay, and her deciding that she has to take off now because the light's getting, and really being very responsible about the whole thing. And he finally goes off by himself. But I'm running out of time, so I just want to get to the whole thing where eventually the Lord Osen goes and tells Naki, or he tells Callan to remove Naki's ring, and Naki absolutely loses her mind. It's like such a tell. She really thinks she's playing this well. And they read her mind again, and Colin pulls away and is just like, well, fuck. She learned black magic deliberately. She hated the guild and was very resentful and purposely befriended Lillia to lure her so that she could have somebody to blame the murder on. She was inspired by Skellen, who she admired for avoiding capture. The mind block wasn't something she'd planned for, but it was easy to get past. I suspect no ordinary block would have been effective on a black magician. Naki then found a thief willing to teach her how to survive in exchange for magical favors. He brought her people that nobody would miss so she could strengthen herself and ensured the bodies were never found. And this is really the thing that Sonia is like, motherfucker. She just is out here fucking murdering people. Jesus, innocent nobodies that had nothing to do with her. Which really is like, that is an extra detail that I shouldn't have been surprised by, but I was like, oh my God, Jesus. And it reminded me that we have this whole serial killer from like the beginning of the book that we still haven't figured out exactly who's responsible for that. There's been an assumption that it was Skellen's mother, but we don't know that. And it could have been Skellen, but maybe not. Like, was it Naki out here doing that way before the, she decided, exercise? But it said that she was delighted, or was inspired by how Skellen escaped despite murdering so many people. So I don't think so. I don't know. And this leads to a short conversation between Osen and Sonia, where he's basically like, all right, you read my mind while I wear this ring and we'll see. And they begin to realize that he's not able to conceal his thoughts the way that she was. And they realize that using this kind of stone takes some practice, which I thought was pretty interesting because I don't know how much practice Lorkin's gotten from it, but I hope that if it comes down to it being used, that he's going to know what the hell he's doing. I hope that they have let him practice on them. So this chapter ends with Sonia and Lillia talking, and Lillia just being really just, the scales have fallen from her eyes, as they say. I don't want to say she's bitter exactly because that's too strong a word, but it's clearly a shock. And she's also dealing with the fact that this revelation means that Naki's going to get executed. That Naki's going to get executed. And Sonia tries feebly to be like, well, maybe the king will give her a pardon. And she's like, yeah, right. She learned black magic and went and killed a lot of people. Definitely not getting a pardon. And Sonia then realizes that she may have to be the one to perform the execution because she's a black magician. And I was like, oh, I forgot that was a thing. That's kind of fucked up. So, yeah, damn. All right, I'm going to wrap up, but thank you so much, Ashleigh, for commissioning this. I'm very interested to see what happens with the rest of the story now. Just one episode left, so I hope you all are ready for it. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.